Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to a special edition of Monuments Monday. What we've done for the end of the year is we've collected questions that people have asked about monuments on the battlefield, and I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability. I should mention that I have done no preparation for the questions, and I don't even exactly know what the questions will be. So we'll see how it goes.
All right, Tim, let's get started. So first, Todd Welsh asks, do you think the park would have objections to a monument for the 2nd Maryland mascot dog by the mass graves? She died in battle, and I think that would be a fitting place if privately funded.
So, as I understand it, there's a moratorium on further monuments on the battlefield. There have been several times over the course of my lifetime where the park has imposed a moratorium on monuments. And I think, there was an unofficial moratorium, and then they did allow the Maryland Monument and the Delaware Monument, and then the Mississippi, delegation to put up a monument to the one of the Mississippi units. So they have bent the rules over the years, but I know some groups that have tried to put up monuments over the years and failed to do so. So I would say that they would not allow a monument to, I've heard her name called Grace, the dog of the 2nd Maryland that led the charge party field on July 3rd. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I think we probably could use another monument to animals. I'd prefer a monument to, like, the horses that were killed in the battle. But I would say that that's not going to happen on park property.
All right, up next, at Doug Goss 4855 asks, is Armistead's marker on the correct location? Blue and Gray magazine claims he fell closer to the stone wall near one of Cushing's guns.
Oh, very good. So this question about Armistead, I just came up recently. Somebody had asked me about it. And, Wayne Motts, who wrote a biography of Armistead and even a longer master's thesis on Armistead, he, in his all his collected research, has Armistead falling much closer to the stone wall from where the marker is. And of course, yes, he put his hand on one of Cushing's guns, but where were those guns at the moment that he puts his hand on it? Because of course, he pushes guns up near the wall. But I think he did a survey of all the people who gave a distance inside the wall or inside the angle from Armistead fell, and he came up with the idea that yes, it was closer to the wall than where the monument is.
All right, up next, at Court Johnson K1H asks, has ground-penetrating radar been used to find the burials still on the field? This is in reference to the Southern dead we know are present but haven't been recovered as mentioned in our videos on Hancock Avenue.
As far as I know, they haven't run ground-penetrating radar over the actual field on top of the ground. But there have been aerial surveys done with some type of infrared photography to try to find the locations of old house sites and roads. I remember talking to one of the park personnel about this when it was done, and one of the problems was the plowing of the fields constantly disrupts some of that information that we get on that. But I am not aware that they've run ground penetrating radar over the battlefield. And I think the park, when you talk to them about it, I would think that they would say that, hey, we know there are people buried on the battlefield, but the whole battlefield is like a cemetery for the soldiers that fought here. And, I don't think there's a desire to find out the exact locations.
Up next, at Buck Johnson 135 asks, I never had the chance to visit the old visitor center, and I'm a bit confused about its precise location. Can someone explain to me where it was in relation to certain monuments, perhaps?
So the original, when we talk about the visitor center, you got to keep in mind that the War Department, when they ran the battlefield, had an office downtown, and the National Park Service, when they first came to Gettysburg, had an office in the old library building on Baltimore Street downtown. And although they had like a map and some information there, it wasn't like a visitor center. The first official park visitor center was the Cyclorama building that was built in 1962. And we talked about how that was built right behind the Bryan House on Hancock Avenue. It had its own parking lot. But in the 1970s, I think 1971, they purchased the old Rosenstiel Museum, which was directly across the entrance from the Soldiers National Cemetery on the Tawnytown Road. And that became the National Park Service Visitor Center as we know it. And of course, that building was torn down, I think, in 2009, and the Cyclorama building was torn down in 2013.
All right. Up next is a question that I can actually answer. At Guitaron66 asks, so who is doing the music on the outro and intro for these videos?
I do not know.
But I do. So the answer to this is that it's actually music from our editing software called Wondershare Filmora. An artist or specific song name isn't listed, but I do have it categorized under Rock Youth on their platform. So, our next question about monuments is from @DanC732. He says, my great-great-great-grandfather's infantry regiment, 119th PA Volunteers, has a monument on Big Round Top, but all evidence I have ever seen shows them nowhere near Big Round Top during the battle and the days after. How did they choose where to erect the monuments?
Oh, the 119th Pennsylvania was stationed on the summit of Big Round Top. And it's been a while. We did a little video on that. And I think in the video, I don't know if you can see the monument or read the inscription, but they were up there, I think, on July 4th to like July 6th, maybe July 5th. It says on the monument that they were positioned up there. Of course, they're part of the 6th Army Corps. And so that unit was there, in fact, on top of that hill. And I guess they thought that would be a really cool place to put the monument.
Up next, David Staller 8247 asks, where does the old Veterans Trail exactly begin?
So the old Veterans Trail to the summit of Big Round Top that we talked about in one of our videos, and perhaps we'll put a link to that video in the description. So it started from what we call South Confederate Avenue at the monument to the 10th Pennsylvania Reserves. It's a all bronze memorial that sits on top of a rock at South Confederate Avenue, just before you get to Warren Avenue. If you see, you can park, there's a little parking space in front of it, and you got to walk over. And right near the 9th Massachusetts Monument, that's where the trail starts up the summit of Big Round Top.
All right. Our next question is from Estelle Beard, and she actually has two, but I'll ask the first one here. And she asks, do guides take people through or to the Devil's Kitchen?
Hi, Estelle. So generally, we don't go to the Devil's Kitchen on a tour, but you probably know I was a tour guide that did mostly 8th graders every year for 30 years, and I took hundreds of groups of 8th graders to the Devil's Kitchen. Now, what had happened was, and before I became a tour guide, you used to be able to drive a bus into Devil's Den and you'd empty the bus out at Devil's Den. But the park really didn't want kids in massive quantities in Devil's Den, and buses had trouble making the turns up around Devil's Den. So they restricted bus traffic in Devil's Den. And one of my fellow tour guides prior to me came up with the idea to stop the buses at the Big Round Top parking lot, walk kids down the Devil's Den and back up to the bus, or send the bus to Little Round Top and walk the kids to Devil's Den and walk them up Little Round Top. And it was a genius of an idea. So starting at that point, then when I started to become a tour guide, if you wanted to take a group of kids on a venture in the middle of your tour, and it took about a half an hour, you'd park at Big Round Top and walk through the Devil's Kitchen. If you're going down the Devil's Den anyway, why not veer off and go through the Devil's Kitchen? So I walked thousands of kids directly through the kitchen and to Devil's Den, and kids loved it.
All right, her next question is, do you have any ideas as to which monuments had the biggest crowd at their dedications? She assumes it would be the Pennsylvania monument, but still wants to check.
That's great. I don't think I've ever seen attendance figures for individual monument dedications, but we do have groups of monuments who are all dedicated at the same time. And so if they were all dedicated on like Pennsylvania Day, was September 11th, 1889, off the top of my head. And that day, you know, multiple monuments from Pennsylvania were dedicated, so the crowds went from one dedication ceremony to another, and I imagine some of those dedication ceremonies had the largest crowd. New York Day was July 1st through 3rd, 1893. Even though it's 3 days, it's New York Day. And there were large amounts of people that came and ventured from one dedication ceremony to another. There was a huge crowd to High Watermark Monument. We were just talking about in the previous Monuments Monday video, including it was announced that Benjamin Harrison, the president, was supposed to be at that dedication ceremony. And William Howard Taft dedicated the United States Regular Memorial, which I believe is 1908 off the top of my head. There were a large amount of people at Pennsylvania monument dedication, but I couldn't tell you which one. I bet you one of the more modern ones probably had a higher attendance than some of the earlier ones, but that's a great question. I have to look into it.
Next up, the Lincoln Highway Association Pennsylvania chapter asks, does the ACHS have a Lincoln Highway 1928 concrete marker in our collection of artifacts?
We do. So we do have the concrete marker. I think, if I remember correctly, ours is missing the little disc of Abraham Lincoln's face that was attached to it. But we do have one. I remember that when we were designing the museum, I was thinking about putting it on display, if that makes you guys happy. But there are still a number of them out there along the Lincoln Highway in Adams County, and we're well aware of them. But if you guys have an extra one you would like to give us that's in really nice shape, then maybe we can put it on display.
Up next, Francie Soros asks, how were the stonecutters, quarries, and construction companies chosen? Are there any interesting stories about that? Wow,
there's a lot. You know, that's a subject that I'm really interested in, and I may do a video on the quarries. It seems to me that during the period of monumentation, there were outside companies like the Westerly, Rhode Island company that put up a lot of the monuments, that each one of these monument companies had a contract with locals at a certain quarry to quarry the stone for some of the monuments or the flank markers. Sometimes the base of the monument is made out of local stone, while the main monument is made out of granite from New Hampshire or Maine or Vermont or some other place. And the local guys would create the base of the monument, flatten out the area, the monument would arrive, and they would install the monument. So the Bushman Quarry is an interesting quarry that is on private property today. Of course, the Powers Hill, the Leitners had a quarry, and there are smaller quarries on the battlefield that were used for different monument purposes. Also, the quarries in the area, gave construction material to the foundations of buildings around the town, like the foundation of the courthouse, for instance, or some of the private buildings in the town. So there were granite companies that were established here. Although, remember, our Gettysburg granite is technically diabase and not granite. I'm sure I could come up with some really good stories about the quarries, but I might do that in a future Monument Monday video.
Devin Sorensen asks, what is the best and most reliable resource on learning where the monuments are located?
Oh, that's a good question. How, if you want to find out about all the monuments, I remember when I was, first studying the battlefield, there was no real source on where the monuments were located. Of course, I mentioned in a video, I think last year, that Kathy George, the park historian at the time I was coming to Gettysburg in the 1970s and early 80s, published a handbook that gave you a listing of the monuments and what avenue they were located on and date of dedication, and it was very, very helpful. And then, later some companies came out with maps of the battlefield that showed the monuments and markers and tablets on them. I've never really found one that was really complete. Those printed maps. And of course, there's little booklets that people printed over the years, but usually they're printed by people that are not as knowledgeable on the subject as they could be. Now, a couple resources I'd recommend for this is Bob Velke. He has an app that you can buy for your phone, and on that app, let me think of what the name of it is. I have it on my phone, but on that app, you can download it. I think it costs $10, and then Pocket Gettysburg. And he has every monument location on a GPS coordinate, and you can walk to the monuments using your phone with that app, and it's just incredible. And of course, Google Maps has some of that. And then, of course, there's the website Stone Sentinels. And that guy has done a fabulous job with putting photographs of monuments on the battlefield, but it doesn't have every monument marker and tablet.
All right. Up next, Ricardo Medina asks, at the time of construction for the monuments, of which was the most difficult to create? He imagines that some were easier or harder than others.
Yeah, I'd imagine that too, that some of the monuments, they're balanced. They have pillars in them. I noticed that the 27th Pennsylvania monument at Coster Avenue seems like it's very shaky. And I think that one has probably fallen over before. Some of them trees have hit. You probably know the story of Henry Kirk Bush Brown when he was doing the monument for General John Fulton Reynolds, balanced the equestrian statue just on 2 points, and the horse has 2 hooves in the air, and that's very interesting. The 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry Memorial, actually, when they constructed it, or when they were creating it, in the middle of creating the monument, realized that it was too much weight to hold on the horse's hooves they had placed. And so they have a tree stump going up inside the middle of the horse to hold the monument up because they were afraid it would snap and fall off. Oh, a good example is the 4th Ohio Infantry on East Cemetery Hill, where it was a large monolith and it just started to lean over, and the park in the 1970s had to actually remove it from its base, and it was missing for like 20 years because it was not constructed properly. So, I mean, the whole process of putting these, I would have loved to have watched one of the monuments being erected in the day.
Our final question is asked by Harry Stratton, and he asks, what's one monument you would add to the battlefield, Tim, if you could?
Wow. I think, of course, we're talking about monuments, markers, or tablets. And it does look like to me that there were, people talked about putting up monuments to different events that occurred in the battle, and they never did. Like, for instance, the 2nd Wisconsin wanted to put up a monument to the spot where General Archer was captured. And of course, on the first day's battle, we have a vague idea of exactly where he was captured. So I'd love to see where these veterans wanted to put up that monument. John Batchelder, when he was alive, had driven stakes on the battlefield all over the place, denoting where different significant things had occurred. And I think it's from the Huntington Library in California. We have a partial list of the stakes that he was going to put, or that he did put on the battlefield, that no longer exist. And one of those was like the spot where Gabriel Paul was wounded on July 1st. And things like that are endlessly fascinating to me. But I mentioned earlier in this video, so I'll say it again, how come we don't put up a monument to honor all the horses that were killed in the fighting? Remember, if you like all the content that we've been putting on our YouTube video, please like and subscribe.